Okay. So now that we're recording, let me share my screen again and we'll get back here. All right. So let's, with regards to the spawner, that's super simple. We can I take that back. It's not super simple, but it's not something that has to be done either now or later. Let's do the animations first, and then we'll do the spawner if we have time, or next. Either way. Basically, you just instantiate a prefab is the best way to do it. But let's save that for afterwards. It's a good idea, and I want to do it because we can make like one of these where you can run to it and then like destroy all the bad guys. I don't know. We'll see. All right. Either way, we got a rat here, and I deleted the other guys. And we're gonna drag and drop our bad guy manager onto the rat. Okay, and then I'm gonna open up bad guy manager. Is this the right screen? Okay, so here's our bad guy manager. And let's take a look at him. So we wrote this a while ago when we were using the old, what do you call it? The old movement system. So we're going to have to replace a lot of this code. Okay. So we have access to his transform. We have access to move speed. I don't think we're going to need move speed because he's going to move based off of the animation. We use root motion like we've done before. We have a target, and this target is good. We're going to need this because this is how the rat is going to keep updated with where the player is. Rotation speed we'll need, and a radius of satisfaction we'll still need. So if he gets close enough to the player, we want him to stop and perform some sort of sweet looking attack animation. All right, so in update, we have move toward target and face target. Face target, we're going to keep as is, because all we're doing there is we are looking at the player. And so that's perfect. We'll leave that as is. But the move towards target, this is going to need to be changed. And essentially what we want to do here is, instead of actually moving the transform, like we do right here with this line of code, what we're going to do is we are going to communicate with the animator controller, telling it to either play the idle animation or play the idle animation, or play the walk animation or run animation towards the player. That's what we want to do. Okay. So I think some of this code we can keep. I'm going to delete all of this. So if we don't have a target, we don't want him to move. If we are close enough to the target, so the radius of satisfaction is essentially an invisible circle around the target, and if we are within that circle, if we're within that radius, then we'll stop. We don't want to continue to move. This is what prevents that jiggling effect inside where we're bouncing around our target. Okay, and I don't know if move towards target, I don't like this. That's fine. We'll leave it as move towards target right now. I usually prefer more generic, like act or do cool stuff as method names, but I don't advise those. It's good job security, but not good program readability. Job security because nobody else can read your code. You're the only one that can change it. So that works great until you actually want somebody to be able to read your code and help you. So I don't advise that. Yeah. Okay, so first thing, let's do this. So we have a player controller, and if we look, here's our player controller. There's idle and run. Because, and this is where planning comes into play, because we want to eventually add an attack animation, I think what makes sense is let's have a separate animator controller for our enemy. You could reuse the same one. that we use for the player, but we're going to have different animations for our bad guys. And so let's have a separate animator controller. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this by hitting Control D. It's like copy paste all in one. And we will call this bad, not bad, but bad guy controller. Okay. The nice thing about copying it is or duplicating it is it copied all of the stuff that we had set up already, which is basically idle and run. Okay. Now, the cool thing is because of the way 3D animations work, the same animation that we applied to our mouse, we can also apply to our rat. All right. So we have our rat here. And we have this, we want to drag and drop this bad guy controller on him. Okay. Now let's go back to this code. And what we want to do, if we get to this point, so I'm gonna change the code structure of this a little bit. And instead of focusing entirely on moving, I don't like this. Move towards target. I'm just going to call it act. Or perform action. Anybody else struggle with method names sometimes? Like sometimes you're like, yes, that's the perfect method names. And sometimes you're like, I can't come up with a name that accurately describes what this method is doing.
So what does perform actions do? Just off the bat.
It does whatever we tell it to do.
No. I mean, like, what exactly are we going to tell it to do?
We're going to tell it to move or stand still or do a cool attack animation.
All in the same method.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So if target equals null, and generally this is how I code, code structure wise. I will do a comments. So no target stand still. I'll do something like that, like right above an if statement. Not only do I try to capture what the if statement does or what the if statement is checking for, but I also summarize briefly what we do in that case. Rather than putting a comment on every line, this is generally what I do. Okay. We'll say else if, copy this in here. We'll say close to target attack. Far away from target, move towards target. Okay. That's generally the code structure. Like in terms of how I comment it and how I set it up, this is what, and obviously if there are more actions, we could plug them in there, but this is generally how it's done. Now, you could go a little bit more complicated and set this up as a state machine, where you might have a pursuing state and then an attacking state and then a stand there looking off in the distance state. Anything like that is fine, where you have an enum, a set of enum values that correspond to each state. The time that I would switch to an enum from this is if you are doing checks in several different places and your decision making involves the use of a particular state. With this, it's very linear. Either we're doing this, or this. We aren't performing several different tasks related to the state that we're in. And so we don't need an official state for that. Even here's a secret I'll share with you. Even in Access Football, with as complicated as the AI is in running a professional sports game, I don't use a state machine. I probably should, but it's the code structure is not necessarily the prettiest. Hold on, I'll show it to you. So the AI. So I separated to run the AI for the players on the field that you weren't controlling. I separated into several different scripts because it gets kind of long. For example, the main player AI script is almost 5,000 lines, and then it separates into. So if you're on offense, every game tick, this is what you get called. Okay, and so it's literally set up like this. And the reason I don't use a state machine is because there would be so many states. So I kind of just set these parameters and do stuff based off of that. Okay, so if this is the case you're in, then you're going to do all this. If this is your situation, then you're going to do all this. Okay, and so even in larger scale games, that sort of code structure is fine. Okay.
So do you reuse the same like AI framework with this kind of struct with heck even this code like for every single release of Access Football every year? Like how much do you tweak it?
It varies. That's a good question. So the entire code base is big. I don't even know how big it is, but I work on different areas. So generally my strategy is all right. Sorry, this can be a slightly longer question. When you have a game, and let's say you guys release a game, the game itself, and let me say this, if you plan on releasing sequels, releasing updates or DLC or whatever it is, it's important to have an identity for your game. So for example, if you look at the really popular long-running game franchises, they all have a very solid identity. Like take Zelda, for example. The things that make Zelda are very obvious. And if you changed a lot of those mechanics, the game would not feel like a Zelda game. And a lot of times with franchises, you'll have games that will deviate from that, and people say like, this doesn't feel like a XYZ game. And so having an identity for your game is really important. Okay, that's the first piece. The identity for Access Football stands on three main areas. And my goal, whenever I release a new version every year, is to improve categorically each of those three pillars, you could call them, relatively equally. And so that largely dictates where I spend my time. But I frequently will go back and clean up code, optimize code, do that sort of stuff. If that makes sense. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And what are those? Well, actually, that's a whole nother question. We'll get back to this.
We could go down a rabbit trail. That's a question for a Thursday. But yes, sorry, wrong game. Yes, so this structure, long story short, this code structure is totally fine. You don't need an enum state machine. You can, and if you're starting from scratch, go for it. It's not a bad thing. I'm just saying it's not necessary. So if you recall, I'm going to go over to our player manager. We had an animator component, and I'm going to copy and paste this over to our bad guy here as well, so we can get access to the animator. And if you remember, what we did was we simply communicated with the animator, and we set that speed value. And so, for example, on our bad guy, if we go to the bad guy controller, which we see right here, on the left side, we created a parameter called speed. And what these parameters do is they help us create conditions for when to transition. So for example, when we get to the point where we want to attack, we will flag the animator as, hey, play this attack animation, and it'll kick in and do that. So the parameters are how we communicate with the animator. Okay, and so that's what we are doing here. So when we are standing still, when we don't have a target, we're simply going to tell the animator to say set float speed 0. Okay, we will set the speed float to 0. Any questions on that? See, we do the same thing right here. All right. Now, quick question. Doesn't the animator think technically work as a state machine? Yes, it is technically a state machine. But what's important to understand is our scripts here are separate from the animator controller. The animator controller does work like a state machine, but the way that we get that to switch states is by doing these. Okay. And in fact, I'm going to go back to Texas. So you can see I do the same thing here. I thought I did something different. There are additional. Never mind. We won't get into that. That's another rabbit hole. I want to show you this. So we'll show you this. So if we don't have a target, we're going to stand still. If we get to our target, we're also going to stand still. This is where we will plug in the attack animations later, but we want them to stand still. If we're far away, then we will simply tell the speed to go to 1. And so we'll transition to running. Okay, good so far. Any questions? All right, so I'm going to go back to this. Let's click on our rat. And we need access to his transform, which I don't think we do anything with his transform, do we? Yes, we need access to his position. So we can, and then we need access to his animator. So we'll drag and drop that too. Okay. And run it. And we get a null reference. At line 14, set target. So we get a null reference, which is this right here. Okay. Now, the question is, we actually use a few different objects here. There's the game manager instance, which could be null. There's the player, which could be null as well. Okay, and so what we have to do is we have to figure out which of these two is null. So if we go to game manager, we see that the singleton gets set on awake. All right, and so this error is getting thrown in start. Awake runs before start. So game manager is not going to be null. So my guess is whatever code sets the player in the game manager happens after we call this. And so let's go to player manager. It's not here. So now let's go to game manager. And where do we set player? So here's the trick. Basically, what I want is I want to check all of my scripts to see where I can find where we are setting the player. And so I'm going to hit Control Shift F. And this is find in files. This will search all of the scripts. And I want to see, do anywhere in our code, do we have player equals something? No. So this explains why we have a null reference, because we never actually set the player. Okay. And so what I'm going to do, this is public. We can do a couple of different things. We can simply inside the player manager, say game manager dot instance dot player equals this, because the player is a player manager. And so inside of player manager, we can just pass a reference to this. Okay. Think that'll work. Let's see. No, we got a null reference. Now, who can tell me why this is happening? This is actually a difficult thing to debug, but I've made enough mistakes to know what's happening. Anybody, come on, I'll give you a 500 on your midterm. Does the function run first? Which function? So here's the thing. Inside of bad guy, this is our rat. Inside of bad guy manager, we call start. Okay. Inside of our player, we set the part. So, Nick, you're close. This right here is what sets it. And in our bad guy, we are trying to get access to this. So what Nick is saying is basically the start function of our bad guy runs before the start function of our good guy, our player. Okay. And I think Unity does it based off of the hierarchy. So if we take the mouse and we move it above the rat and run it, we still crash. Okay. So here's how you fix this. Assuming this is what I think it is. You go to edit and then project settings. And then you go down to this script execution order. Click on it. And what you want to do here is you can manually tell Unity which scripts, bless you, you want to run before the other scripts. So in this case, we want our player manager to run before our bad guy manager. And so you come over here to this, you click plus, and then you go player manager, and then you go plus, and you go bad guy manager. And as long as this number is bigger than this number, you're good. Then you hit apply, close out. Now we run it, see if we get the error. No error. Now he's facing. This is perfect. Cool. But he's not moving. That's not perfect. So if I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna unmaximize and go to scene view. He's just chilling. Okay, he's in idle. And if we look at this, his speed is 0. It should be 1. And so if I change this to 1, he takes off. So why is it not 1? So here's what we do. Let's put some print statements. No target. Figure out which one of these is today. Close to. Who is that? Luke. Good job, Luke. This brings us to our next tip of the day. Do you remember last class when I said you can do this part one of two ways? You can either manually type the variable or you can use this other secret method for doing it. And I said we're going to type it because it's faster. Well, this is the downside to typing it. You are error prone, or maybe you aren't error prone, but I am. And so I think Luke's exactly right. It should be a capital S. I will very briefly show you the other way of doing it, which is a better way. Let's see if this works. And now our rat's coming. Why is our rat so much faster? Okay. And so he stops like he should. I feel like it's because we're using a rigid body and he's not. Why did we want to use a rigid body? Why did we switch to using a rigid body?
Was it something to do with the collision of like the one of the spheres?
That's right. That's right. I wonder if we can just do it this way. Let me try this. He's still faster than we are. Yeah, it doesn't register the. I'd rather not have a rigid body on him. Go through you. That's really strange. I wonder if it has to do with the difference in the rig. Either way, all right, we'll get back to that. For now, we'll leave the rigid body off. Okay, so let's do this. Let's continue with the attack animation, and I'll show you this part later because this works, although it's not necessarily the best way to do it. All right, so I'm going to go back to Mixer and we'll see if we can. Is that my email address? Is that my password? All right. Attack. Okay, so we've got like a zombie attack. It's like, wow. He doesn't have a weapon, and so I could do the jump attack. Um, let's a surprise uppercut. Let's just go with is there like a punching? All right. How does this one look? No, not that one. This one. Does kind of look like a zombie. Yeah. There's a lot of attack animations on here. Why are the only punching ones zombies? Is that the only thing that can punch? Oh, this could be our attack. Oh, there's a drop kick. That's pretty funny. Oh, wait, here's one. No, that looks like it looks like he's holding a weapon.
I think it's thrust. So yeah, it would be like a sword or something.
Looks like it's the punch. Okay, here we go. Okay. I don't like any of these. We need. They're like a. Oh, that's creepy. All right, let's do. We'll go back to one of these basic ones. Maybe this one will work. Should we go with this one? Talk to me, Goose.
His hands kind of
It
go.
seems to.
His hands kind of go
Yeah.
through his head, but besides, it's fine.
We could just do a kick. This one? Or do we want to go with? We need the jump. All right, we'll do the jump. All right, FBX. Remember, don't do the one with Unity. With skin, we don't need the skin download. We'll see if we can make this work. All right, so where's our animations? I'm gonna drag and drop this in here. Okay, what time's this class over? 12:40. Okay. So we'll go to our jump attack. Remember, first thing we have to do is go to rig, switch it to humanoid. All right, for our avatar, we can copy. Where is our ret avatar? If you get this, it's always okay just to go create from this model. It just saves a little bit of memory. It's not a big deal. Okay. Now, we're gonna have to adjust some things with this. So we have our animation working. First thing you'll know is when he starts, his feet appear to go into the earth. Okay, and so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to bake that into the animation, which means it's not going to change. Okay. We don't want to. So here's the thing. Remember, when you bake something, when you bake the Y or the XZ or the rotation into the animation, that means it won't change the transform of the character. And so, for example, if you notice here with this one, we do change the Y, but the transform value is not going to change. And so if the end of the animation ends up in a different place in the beginning, that's what you don't want to bake. And so, for example, here we're changing the X and the Z, like he's moving forward. If we bake this into the pose, we would actually see him move forward, but when the animation finished, he would slide back to where he started. So we don't want to do that. But we do want to bake the rotation into it. I don't think we rotate, but we do want to bake the rotation because we will be rotating as we go. All right, we don't want to loop this. And we're going to call this jump attack, just in case we have multiple attacks. All right, so now I'm going to make sure I have our bad guy controller selected. And I'm going to go to our jump attack animation, open it up and pull the animation value out of it, which is this one right here. I'm going to drag and drop it right here. Bang. Now, here's the way this works. You have to set transitions from every state that could possibly transition into this attack animation. So we could be idle and transition to it. We could be running and transition to it. If you have a ton, like all of your states that can transition into it, you can do it from this any state, but you have to be really careful with this because this is literally a catch-all. That means from any state, including itself, you can transition to it. So I use this very rarely. It's not as useful as you think it might be. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go from run to jump attack, from idle to jump attack. Now, when our jump attack finishes, we want to automatically transition back to idle. Okay. And now this is where our exit time comes into play. We talked about has exit time before, and I selected the transition from jump attack back to idle. And remember, this has exit time means a certain percentage of the animation must complete before we transition. Okay. Also, we set the conditions for transitioning down here. If you don't set any conditions, it will automatically transition after the set amount of time. Okay. So for example, if I uncheck has exit time, it's gonna, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Let's do this. So what I'm going to do is when our jump attack finishes, we're going to want to transition at a certain period of time. Okay, and we see this transition happening right here. If we wanted this to be transitioning more here and not go into this like weird pose afterwards, we would simply take this exit time and pull it back. Okay, and you can drag and drop and do it here. It's whatever you want. All right, and so what I typically do is we land, that's our attack. And then right as he's standing up right here, this is where I want to start transitioning. So I'm going to pull this back to right here, and I'm going to have it finish transitioning about right here. All right, so we can look at the whole thing from start to finish. Click play, jumps, comes up into that. If it appears too abrupt, you can increase the duration of the transition. Okay, so it runs, jumps. Okay, that looks a little smoother. And so that's it. That's all we do for that transition. We don't need to specify any conditions because we want the transition back to idle to happen automatically. So there's no transition, or excuse me, there's no parameter condition that we need to specify. All right. Now let's come back over here because now we need to look at the condition for actually transitioning to the attack. And so how you set up your parameters largely dependent upon what your character is capable of doing. And so if you have multiple attacks, you could set up an attack parameter where it's like, if attack is 1, then do this. If attack is 2, do that. If attack is 3, do that, and just transition to different animations based off of that. Or if you have a single attack, you could do something more simple like this. Okay. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new variable, and I'm going to do a trigger. All right. Now there's different ones. There's float, which are decimals. There's ints, which are whole numbers. There's bool, which are either true or false. And then there's triggers. Triggers are useful when you need to set a variable and then you want it to automatically flip back. Okay. So for example, attacks, jumps are good like that when you, let me say it this way. So for example, if you've got an attack button or a jump button and you hit that button, you flag the animator and you say, okay, jumping is now true or attacking is now true. You will have to, at some point, manually set it back to false. Otherwise, it'll continue to loop. And so you jump and then you land and you jump and then it'll continue to do that same thing over and over again. And that's relatively easy to do. You simply, generally, you just set up a coroutine and then like a half second later, you just set it to false. But triggers have that built in automatically. So as soon as they trigger, it'll flag the variable, then it'll immediately reset it. And so this is often what I use. And so I'm just going to call this attack. Okay. So here, our transition from running, let's take a look at that. So we don't want exit time. We don't want a certain amount of the run animation to complete before we transition. We want to transition as soon as the trigger occurs. And so we're going to come down here and I'm going to add, this time I'm going to select attack, and there's no condition for that. There's no value, I should say. So as soon as the attack is true, we're going to transition and go back. So now we can look at this. Here's the transition. We're running, and then we jump and attack. So that looks fine. Okay. Now let's do this one. Again, this is from idle. So I'm going to uncheck has exit time and come down here and go attack. And we can look at the transition. Very good. Okay. Questions? All right. Now.
Quick question. Why do we have two attacks? Well, why are we studying from idle? Like, I would kind of assume that, you know, the grab would like run up and like immediately do the attack, but why would he attack from idle?
If essentially there are conditions under which he will be in the idle animation and want to attack. You can remove this, but what will happen is, let's say, for example, the player is just standing still. Okay, we do the attack, we transition back to idle, we would do the attack again. It would look stupid if we did the attack, transitioned to idle, and then ran for a little bit, and then did the attack again. We need to handle the case where the player or the bad guy lands, and then as he lands, he's automatically in the position to attack again. We don't want to have to transition to idle, then transition to run, and then transition to attacking again. We want to be able to attack from either idle or running. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay. Now let's run this and see what happens. Now, we can see there are some problems. Talk to me about the problems.
Well, I keep rotating.
Yeah.
It seems like there's no, we took the visibility off the mouse, right?
Right.
So that's why he's probably going to
So this is where it gets a little tricky. This particular attack animation is difficult to work with, because the attack animation includes movement. Okay, and if we are moving, it looks a little better, but not much. And essentially what we would have to do is we would have to, in order to get this to work, so if you have animations that require precise movement, excuse me, if you have like attack animations that require precise movement and positioning, you have to essentially code the movement while the animation is running. And so if for whatever reason we had to use this animation, what I would do is keep proper distance between the rat and the mouse while the animation is playing, so that we're constantly moving the mouse, or excuse me, constantly moving the rat to be in a position where he doesn't have to rotate like this. And it would look fine, but it's a lot of work. Generally, the best thing to do is to not use these type of animations. You're better off with a more simple animation, or one that doesn't have so much movement. Okay. And so that's the route we're going to go. We're just going to go something. Sure. Let's go with this one.
I mean, do you think it would help to use the that as the flame here as opposed to the mouse?
No, I don't think it matters. All right. So we'll go in here. Rename this to top. Set the rig to humanoid. Now let's come over to this. We'll call this. What is going on with his leg? Some of these do that. Let's just find one. Is this the one we were doing? Let's try this. No, so I'm going to delete this one. Go in and change this to just attack. Set it to humanoid. Okay. Like I said, some of them just don't work. All right, so this is good. Let's we'll bake the rotation and all of the movement into it. We don't want them actually moving. Does he actually move? Not really. Okay. And then we're just going to, so in the animator control, I'm going to click on jump attack. I'm going to change it to just attack, although it doesn't matter what it's called. And then for the motion, I'm going to put our other attack into it like this. Okay. We can look at the attack and the transition back. That looks fine. Now let's run this again with the new animation in place and see what we get. All right, so right here, you see, it looks like he's running. Let me pause it. I'm going to go to rat, and we can see exactly what's happening here and the corresponding actions here. So on the bottom, we have our animator controller, and he's in the attack right now. He's finishing. I'm just clicking this step in right here. And now you can see he's transitioning back to idle. He's going to transition to idle, and then he's going to transition to run, and then he's going to attack. So who can tell me what's happening here? I think the rat always runs. Okay. The
Is there
rat always runs before attacking. Right, it's never following the idle attack state. So, and again, this answers, Colin, I think you asked it earlier, why are we transitioning to attack from idle and run? This is why, because if you didn't, you would get this every time, and this is not what we want. Now, is it because the rat thinks he's too far away and needs to move closer? All right, so here's what's happening in the interest of time. Go ahead.
Is the speed always set to 1?
It's never getting set to 0.
Close enough.
Yes, and so that's the thing. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is when we attack, we want to set the speed to 0. Okay. That will allow us to reset. But that still might not fix the problem. It might here, but I'm going to show you the second fix if it doesn't either way. So this runs, our rat comes dashing forward, attacks. Okay, so it does fix it. All right, so a couple things. One, the animation is a little slow, so let's speed it up. I'm gonna click attack, and instead of speed, let's do like 1.3. Here's the second thing I'm going to show you. When we click on idle, if we were still transitioning to run, what you can do here, so I clicked on the idle state, look over here. It shows you all of the transitions that you can make from this state. Run, attack are the only two we have. If both parameters for the transition are true, it has to pick one to go to over the other. And so the order that they're listed shows the order that the transitions are checked. So first it's checking to see, can I transition to run? And if this is false, then it checks, can I transition to attack? And so it's like a big if else statement. So if we wanted it to check for attack first, we simply click this and drag it and swap the two. Okay, this specifies the order that it checks, which can fix a lot of problems. If that's the case. All right, so let's run it again. This time we sped up the attack, and we'll see how this looks. Okay, this looks a little better. All right, let me show you one more thing. In the attack, we have this really big windup. Okay. Really big windup, which is fine. But I want to show you how to kind of edit or trim some of these animations. You can't really edit animations super well in Unity. You need like 3D software for that, but you can trim really well. And so if I wanted to kind of make this a quicker attack animation, I can trim it by doing this. So I click on attack, and then I've got the attack animation selected. And then the start is at frame 0, but I can really take this and pull it down here. So I can have the animation start, like, let's go frame 15, for example. I'm going to click apply. And then if we look at the transition, sorry, that's to run. We want to attack. Okay, now we look at the transition. It cut out a lot of that deep backswing. Okay, and it just kind of smacks them, right, which is it's faster, we'll say. So we're running, and then it's just like, bang. Why does he look like he's smacking behind him? Why is that? How do we fix that?
You
I'm
would do like
smacking
a
you, but
you would
not
do
really.
like a lay cast to like look toward the player character, something like that.
You could, but there's a way easier way. I'm going to show you. So if you go into the
Yes,
attack, go into the attack animation. If you look right here, we are baking the rotation into it. All right. So if I take this off, that means we're going to allow him to actually rotate the player. What is he doing? So here's what happened. First of all, we need to leave this on, but here's the problem. When you trim animations, a lot of times you can cut out part of the rotation that's necessary, which is essentially what we did here. Because we cut out that rotation, he's always off a little bit. So you can create an offset. And so we're going to take this and we're going to turn him about 20 degrees. And see how that looks. I think he still needs to go more to the right.
It looks like he's always looking in the same place. Like regardless of what the offset is.
It looks like he's hitting them now. We can try going farther. All right. If you notice, there's one last thing let's do. In situations where he attacks, and then we move right as he is attacking, it looks bad. He does another attack and he shouldn't. All right, so we're going to fix that the same way we fix the other stuff. When we start to move, how do we turn a trigger off? Because that's basically what we want to do. We want to so like a set trigger. Let's Google it. Unity animator trigger turn off. How to cancel? Yeah. Reset trigger. Reset trigger turns off an animation trigger that is currently on. Reset trigger. Okay. Google is amazing. Now let's see if that fixes it. So we attack, so we move. Sweet. Oh. Cool. All right, good stopping point. Next class, we'll look at we need to do damage, take away health, show how to do that. Then we can do, I'll show you those other things like a spawner and the animator hash things, so you don't have to type it out each time and be prone to making mistakes. All right, so this is good for today. We'll stop here. Can I answer any questions that anybody has right now while our rat beats up our mouse? Okay. All right, well, y'all have a wonderful day. Thursday, I'll be in class, working class. Come with questions if you have them, and yeah, let me know if I can do anything for you guys. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Professor.
See you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.